systems in India with the story of its first trial, components and functions and features. This will be in the presentation. Then we come to the concept of moving from conventional system to the state-of-the-art universal interoperable systems, and then going to the Indian indigenous AT, which you mentioned as the train collision avoidance system. I would like to, at this stage, thank the organizers who have very liberally introduced all of us, including Mr. Mansukhani. This is the area in which indigenous ATP is the area in which Mr. Mansukhani has come, and he will be introducing the concept of indigenous ATP and how it emerged from other ATPs. Then during the course of my discussion, I will also talk about train protection warning system and experience in India, and the train collision avoidance system, which is an indigenous effort, factors for design and implementation, which will be brought out by Mr. Mansukhani. And I believe that this is only the first kickoff webinar. I would request all the participants, I can see that more than almost 150 or 160 participants are there. I would request all participants to kindly send their specific requirements, specific queries, so that we can conceive a proper course in a manner so that we can meet the requirement. The subject is quite large. It cannot be covered in 2 hours. It cannot be covered in even 20 hours. So the subject is quite large. You must draft your questions very clearly, draft your requirements very carefully, so that we can have a continued learning system through people like Mr. Ajay Singh and his academy, so that the show continues and we are able to give a very strong impetus to the concept of Skill India. In fact, I would like India to be the hub of signaling expertise in the world. And for that purpose, the Rail Academy is working on that. Now, I'll start my concept for why signaling is required. So you can still look at the picture on the right-hand side. This picture very clearly shows why it is required. On the road, you can have many vehicles, but on the track side, you can see there's hardly any vehicle. And that precisely is the problem there. Because the trains run on fixed rails and cannot change their path by steering away, but the road vehicle can do that. The trains run at higher speeds at closer headway with heavy trailing loads and require large braking distances. Large braking distances means that you will need to brake the train much ahead before any obstruction is perceived. And therefore, a dependable train control system is required. And that control system is able to display to the loco pilot or the driver sufficiently in advance what is the situation or condition ahead, so that he can operate his train safely, even if there is a train ahead, which is in the case of automatic signaling or even in moving block. Therefore, this particular entire concept of train movement is ensured through a signal, which we have been doing for the last 125 years. And now we talk about this as a movement authority, which has to be shown on the cab, inside the cab. Now, I will just briefly highlight the functions of the railway signaling systems. First and foremost function of any railway signaling train control system is to provide high level of safety in train operation. We just cannot afford even one accident in the entire life cycle of the equipment. And therefore, the design criteria, the design philosophy is very stringent, and the safety is embedded into the entire thing. You have to run trains safely. That doesn't mean that you stop all the trains. You must run the maximum number of trains at the highest speed, following a close headway, so that you are able to improve the throughput and you are able to move maximum number of people or maximum amount of freight from the origin to the destination point. And therefore, apart from the safety, there are other functions, which means that they have to run more number of trains on the same track at higher speeds. And you have to allow, especially in the yards, you must have seen major yards like Delhi and Howrah and Churchgate and Bombay Central. There are a lot of parallel movements taking place without trains colliding with each other. And therefore, this is one of the important functions of signaling, which is simultaneous parallel movements in yard with isolation for efficient and flexible train operations. This is very, very important, because without this, the train operations cannot be done. One of the foremost things which has emerged and which is very critically affecting train operations in the northern region of the country are the inclement weather. Inclement weather conditions, and these conditions you must have observed, the trains have to physically crawl in a manner that you are able to ensure the first function, that is safety. but you have to still run. Now, because of increment method and there's no an additional aid available to the driver or to the loco pilot, you have to run the trains at a controlled speed so that you don't collide. And for that purpose, ATP is the automatic train protection system, which are inside the cab, come into our of help. And these are the aids given to the driver, which allows the train to be run at the maximum permissible speed, even in the case of incremental weather. And last but not the least is one of the most important functions of signaling is it is monitoring on real-time basis all the signaling function assets for the purpose of three things. First thing is the passenger information, which we are able to actuate through our train management systems. Second one is the train control and management, because the train control and management has to be done by the railway operations department. They need real-time information. And third one is, which we have been really not done much work on, is the condition-based predictive maintenance, so that we are able to ensure a zero defect situation for the purpose of train operations. Now coming to the issue of safety. Now how safety is achieved in different scenarios. As I mentioned that safety in train operation is the primary function. How it is achieved at the station. At stations we have got track circuits, we have got interlocking between signals and points and level crossing and slots. Slot means if you are entering into somebody else's area, you must have a control coming in from that area into your area. I'm trying to explain in a slightly brief, simple manner so that the people who have no experience on signaling will also understand. If you are entering into my house, you need a permission to enter my house, right? So therefore, this concept of slot is there, that in the case of you are entering through the area of, or you are trying to infringe into the area of some other cabin or some other control center, then you have to have a slot from that. That's why slot also is interlocked. Then between stations, how do we ensure train? We ensure only one train in the section in the case of absolute block system. In the case of absolute block system of working, only one train is allowed between two stations. But in the case of automatic block signaling, we have divided the block section into small track sections, fully signaled for the purpose of automatic block signaling, where we allow the train to come to the next track section, which is clear of all obstacles. Then we have a typical situation in all the countries, I'll say, the level crossing or the grade crossing. It's available in all the countries, and this crossing is done for the purpose of the local people living in that area to cross from one side, where their houses are there, to the other side where their working area is there, or factory is there, or fields are there. And therefore, level crossing is an integral part of the railway system. And this integral part, therefore, is the source of obstruction for the purpose of train running. And this train operation train running has to be safe, and therefore again you have to close the level crossing gate, lock it before you allow any train to come into it. And that is what is called the safety at level crossings, which is given by interlocking the level crossing with gate. And we also have systems which give approach warning to the road user as well as to the gateman, so that he is able to close the gate in time. Now coming to the first and foremost thing which we are able to help the driver is the multiple aspect color light signals. This is the first aid we give to the driver so that he is able to stop short of any obstruction. All of us must understand that in case the driver fails today, you will have a collision, you will have an accident. That is for sure. Therefore, in earlier days, there were signals which were lower current signals where the visibility was not very clear, very poor, not adequate. And the driver was not able to properly locate the signal at times in the night or in foggy weather. And therefore, there were many cases of accident on account of poor visibility. And we believe that once we give multiple aspect color light signal, that means that you are warning the driver to stop much before he is required to stop. Before reaching any red signal, in fact, passing a red signal in the case of Indian Railway concept is a crime. You will be removed from service. The driver will be removed from service. Therefore, he has to stop short of the red signal. And therefore, in the case of multiple aspect CLS, we pre-warn the driver by giving a yellow, which is about 1 kilometer before it, then double yellow, another 1 kilometer before it, which is a clear indication to the driver that he is required to stop. So this is the only benefit we have been able to give in the last so many years to the loco pilot and driver, so that he is able to control his train properly. And the first question which will emerge is why, if the driver is so vulnerable, why accidents are not taking place? So argument is very, very simple. We are putting on all our trains which are running at more than 100 kmph or maybe more than 90 kmph. We are putting 2 drivers. And we strongly believe that, in fact, it is a proven fact statistically also, that both the drivers will not fail on the same day, at the same time, on the same location. This is the philosophy. And based on that, the probability of a driver passing the signal danger is quite remote. Then we come to the issue of efficiency in operations, information, and proper controlling, which is in the control center. And lastly, but not the least, which is today's subject, is the onboard train protection system, which we have been calling as train protection and warning system, which is an area which is on which we have to work for the next at least 2 decades. This is typically for the people who have not seen the system. This is a typical signal and station diagram, which indicates to you how the signals are located, how the track circuits are there, how the point signals track circuits are interlocked from the cabin. Now, I mentioned in my agenda item that I will show you what is the impact. Now, you look at the entire thing, you will see that there has been a tremendous growth of signaling on Indian Railways. And this growth has been as high as 8,000% in the case of electronic interlocking, which is unheard of anywhere in the world. 8,000% right from 2002 to 2017, 15 years, you had a growth of 8,000%. That means something like 55 to 60% every year. Yeah, that has been the growth. And this electronic interlocking that could be a separate subject of discussion. That foremost objective or benefit which has emerged from electronic interlocking is very, very fast commissioning, very, very effective way of simulated testing, and it is quite free from interference. The interference possibility is quite low. We have spent about 30 years earlier, prior to electronic interlocking, 25 years earlier, where there was a bigger problem on the Indian Railways on account of certain reasons. There was a tendency to interfere with the relay interlocking, which we have been doing in the past for the last 60, 70 years. And that interference with the relay interlocking is a hazardous situation. It is not acceptable, and that can lead to an accident. So you can see that there have been this phenomenal increase in the activities, and you could just see the impact. Now you look at the figure position on the left-hand side, that is how the signaling has grown over the 1981 to 2015, and how the number of accidents have come down. Specifically talking of collisions, in the year 1961, there were 130 collisions, 130 collisions in the country. And today, the last data which I got is of 2015, it is only 5 collisions. And these 5 collisions, we are, in fact, Mr. Mansukani is focusing on these 5 collisions. To eliminate these 5 collisions, we need train collision avoidance system. Now comes the second function of the signaling, which is the cost-effective line capacity measures. Now, line capacity measures, right from the beginning, in fact, started. If you remember, in the 19th century, the physical verification of the line or loop line or the main line at a station was done physically, manually by the station master. And that was leading to loss of time, loss of capacity. And therefore, track circuiting emerged as the first I'll say, device which allowed safe train operations, safe reception of train in the yard without consuming much of physical verification activity. Then came the issue of interlocking. Earlier, even interlocking was not there. Prior to 1925-30, there was no even interlocking. And because the speeds were low and the trains were able to control themselves, the trains were shorter, the braking distance was shorter, they were able to control and stop short of the outer signal, and accidents could be prevented. But as the train lengths increased, speeds increased, headways reduced, the interlocking became a requirement. And as the yard becomes more and more complex, in fact, many of our junction yards are very, very complex with multiple direction movements, and therefore interlocking was a must. You can imagine that if somebody has to physically verify one route, how much time it will take. You will take one train in 1 hour. But with the interlocking, you take one train in 30 seconds. And that is what is the line capacity improvement, which you have been able to give through interlocking. Then came the system of block working. Block working, if you have, in the earlier days, it used to be with a paper line here or some kind of staff which was given to the loco pilot to go into the section, depending on the telephone call between the 2 station masters. Later on came after some accidents were noticed, later on came, I think in the 1920s, the Niels Bohr Toker instrument was introduced in India. And this Toker instrument, many of us have seen is still operating in many parts of the country. These were required to, in fact, the system of token working is that you have to extract a token to enter into a block section. And this token has to be carried by the loco-pilot, which is given by the station master. Now, the system of block working is that only one token can come out, either at station A or at station B. It cannot come at both the ends. And therefore, this token taking out and putting in the pouch and giving it to the loco-pilot was time consuming. And therefore, we evolved a system of tokenless block working that without touching any, without giving any tangible token to the driver, we were able to lower a signal, take off a signal for the driver, and he was able to run the trains. Then came the concept of, as the trains density increased, even this tokenless became an issue because the tokenless also requires certain block operation time. And therefore, the concept of block proving by axle counter with non-cooperative feature and automatic train online feature and automatic train out of section feature. These three features are very important. These three features made it so effective that the dispatching station was able to send a train into the section. Everything else was automatic. Informing the other station master, conveying the train online, and taking the train out of section was all automatic. And this also incrementally improved the line capacity. Multiple aspects, as I mentioned, they improved the running of the trains, and therefore the line capacity improved, because if the driver doesn't run at full maximum permissible speed in the section, then also the line capacity is lost. And most importantly, last but not the least, is the control center, centralized traffic control, which also improves efficiency. But coming to very specific requirement of line capacity in this section, we first of all, in the case of absolute block system, on double line or multiple line section, we introduced the concept of intermediate block signaling. Now, this what the purpose was to, instead of sending only one train, which was the concept in absolute block system, we were now able to send two trains in the section by splitting the block into two by means of a signal which was called intermediate block signal. And later on, as the capacity requirement increased further, where we went in for automatic block signaling to further reduce the headway in section. And so in this very same section, now you can have 4 trains or 3 trains or 5 trains running, one after the other at a headway of 6 minutes. This headway is much smaller in the case of suburban section or metro system. This is much smaller. So now I'll just highlight how the entire thing is. When we open a section, the number of trains in a day will be hardly 3 or 4 or even less. So there was no need of any signaling, anything. There was a method of giving a paper authority to the driver that and there was only one train. So that is the one train only system, which is called as the trains increased to 5 to 6 or maybe up to 7, 8, then there was a method of having a station at both the ends. And these stations at both the ends were able to linked on a Morse paper line clear working, on which the Morse code was exchanged, and they were able to take the line clear, and one train was sent. That is how the system of absolute block working emerged with paper line clear initially. Later on, we had, as I mentioned, token working when the block section length was of the order of 15 to 20 kilometers. We had token working, the capacity went on increasing. Then we went and as the train increases, you had to have certain trains waiting. And for example, in the case of if the number of trains are 5 or 6, and there are 2 trains waiting at station A, how will that other train go out coming from C? So there has to be an additional loop, and therefore the concept of additional loop was introduced. And with that, the capacity incrementally again increased. Then came the issue of introducing a new crossing station. So as the number of trains increased, we have to put a new station. And this new station was able to provide additional capacity because now we had many more lines available, many more sections available to put their trains into the section. And you were able to handle that many trains. This was very, very useful for the purpose of up to 20 trains. You were able to, or maybe 25 trains. Now further increase in line capacity was necessary. And then at that stage, we went in for tokenless block working. Then after this, the capacity is further required to be increased, then the only option is to go for doubling. and that we have the double line, typical double line block system and lock and block. There's an up line, there's a down line. There's no problem of crossing. The trains move steadily in one direction, one after the other. In case of precedence, you got only one loop available. You can have precedence at that. And as I mentioned earlier, that the other option was the BPSC with block panel, further improve the line capacity. This is how the IBS, which I mentioned earlier, IBS emerged, and IBS was able to put trains into the section. And the last, the bottom portion is the automatic signaling. We have multiple automatic signals in the section linked to track circuits and track sections. So you could have 3-4 trains or more in that section. So this is what I mentioned, that IBS splits the block section into 2 sections, allowing 2 trains at a slightly shorter way, and automatic signaling is still required if the headway is to be further reduced. Now this, when you reduce the headway on the same line, then the problem emerges is of safety, because now the number of trains in the block sections are more, and the total block operation time has been totally eliminated. The time available for reacting or acting is very, very low, and therefore there has to be some method of working on it, and that is what emerged. This is a typical automatic signaling 4 aspects situation, how the signal aspects change when the train moves. This emerged this led to the emergence of the TPWS, because TPWS means you cannot pass the signal thread. Even if the driver makes a mistake, the driver sleeps or driver is inert, you will not be allowed to pass a signal ranger. We will talk about it in more detail. And with automatic signaling also, we have TPWS available on each signal, and that ensure that you still do not have a collision in spite of the fact that the trains are running at a close headway. You can see one infill bullies. This is for the purpose of improving the line capacity, which we will explain when we talk about TPWS. Now, this is a typical control chart of Ghaziabad-Aligarh section. Now, you can imagine that what is the situation today. The situation is the number of trains have increased substantially. And the green trains are the trains which are goods trains, and the red trains are the high-speed mail express, semi-high-speed mail express trains or mail express trains. Now you look at the arrow, there are a number of green trains stable. Now this is what is the problem. This is what is the problem, and this problem has to be tackled. And for this purpose, we have to go in for centralized traffic control and train management system. And this is only to give the viewers a view of how complex. And this is the chart only for 8 hours. It's only an 8 hours chart, which is so complex. Now the situation is that we believe that every hour there should be 6 trains each way. But you can see that the number of trains each way is hardly 3 or 4. And that is because of manual local operation and not centralized automatic operations. So therefore, automatic signaling with centralized traffic control and TPWS is required, and that concludes the focus on line capacity along with safety. Now I come to that gap which I mentioned right in the beginning. There is a gap. The aspect of the line side signals and there is an indirect interface with the driver. There's a gap between the signals, loco pilot, and the dispatcher. Now 3 kinds of gaps are there. One is between the controller and the site. Now controller today is talking to the station master, and this indirect way of talking led to one of the accidents. In fact, there was an accident at Meerthal way back in 2004 or 4 or 5, wherein there was a total break of communication between 2 stations, and there was trains waiting at both the ends, and both the station masters did not follow the required procedure and just sent both the trains. This was done because they did not talk to the central controller. The central controller knows the trains are on both the sides, and therefore this is one of the major gaps which has to be plugged, which is not today's subject. That is a separate subject altogether. The second one is another kind of gap, which is between the loco pilot and the controller. Today, the loco pilot and the controller cannot talk to each other. The present system of VHF communication is only limited to the station master only. So the loco pilot has to talk to the train controller, because the person knows that there is a derailment of another train, or there's another obstruction in the section which he can convey to the loco pilot, and this kind of an accident can also be prevented. This can also help the loco pilot in getting assistance or reporting an accident or asking for some kind of a troubleshooting support from the controllers. Now we are coming to the last point, which is the subject of the day. That is the interface of line trackside signal aspects and indicator boards from loco pilot is prone to mistakes. That means that whatever loco pilot is seeing in terms of signal aspect, and he has made mistakes in the past, and this is the gap which has to be plugged by automatic train protection system, which we are terming here as train protection warning system. This particular aspect will be totally taken care of. You will be able to prevent cases of signal passing a danger. You will be able to prevent collision, and you will also be able to prevent derailments at high speed, because the TPWS system or the automatic train protection system ensures a proper braking curve and a safe braking limit of the defined section. Now this is the gap. If you look at the typical signal train control command and flow interface area, this is slightly more technical. Now the today's situation is that you show a signal to the driver, right? And this is the gap which is missing here. This gap is from the signal to the loco pilot. This gap is being bridged by providing a movement authority through the ATP system, automatic train protection system, which is straight away given on the cab, inside the cab to the driver. And if the driver does not respond to it, or is inert or is inactive, in that case there will be automatic application of brakes. The brakes have to be reset. It is counted, and the loco pilot has to explain why this has happened. And this precisely is the area of our work. From this emerges everything now. Whether you talk of headway control, whether you talk of high speed running, whether you talk of more number of trains in the section, whether you talk of precise stopping, especially in the case of metro systems, this emerges from this particular gap. This gap has to be plugged properly. Now I come to the issue how this particular gap we try to do something right in 1924-25. Can you imagine? 1924-25, we had the first trials of automatic train protection system on Indian railways in the British times. That was called the Great Indian Peninsula Railway. Later on, it became the Central Railway, and now it is called the West Central Railway. There was a device which is something like they call it crocodile. There's some kind of metal strip. You can see in the blue arrow. This metal strip actually is connected. When the locomotive passes over it, it gets a feed conveyed to the onboard system. And there was the automatic system. In case when the signal is red or when the signal is green, the supply is extended to the onboard, and that supply holds, because there's a push button here. You can see in the sketch. At the moment that pushes the engine shoe, what is marked as engine shoe, but the moment it is pushed up, there will be a break in the circuit, and that will lead to the solenoid releasing the vacuum, and the train will stop. So whenever there's a green, this power supply is extended by this brush, and this extra control holds the path for that purpose. But if in case it is red, then no power supply is extended, and in that case the vacuum is destroyed. In fact, there were only vacuum trains at that time. There were no air brake trains, which are nowadays there. But those vacuum were destroyed, and vacuum once destroyed, the train has to come to a stop. And that was the first trial. Unfortunately, after this trial, not much was done, because this particular metal, I'll say metal strip, which is almost like 12 to 14 feet in length, and it is of a conductive metal, was getting damaged or stolen, and therefore not much of an headway was made. So, and even after independence, when the Shah Nawaz Railway Accident Inquiry Committee they focused only on the basics of signaling, which I mentioned earlier, that right from track circuits, basic block working, interlocking, level crossing gate interlocking, and IBS. So they focused only on that. But almost there were other committees on ATP, automatic train protection. Kozuru Committee in 1962 mentioned, which I mentioned, about 130 collisions in 1961. Please adopt automatic train control equipment. Next, again, Vanchu Committee said the same thing. Lines on which 100 kmph or above is there, please have automatic train control. Again, Sikri Committee in 1978 said the same, put automatic warning system on the trunk route at least. Khanna Committee again in 1998 after the gas accident said provide train protection warning system on the entire Indian Railways. And much later in 2012, Kakotkar Committee, very recently talked about ETCS on entire golden quadrilateral and diagonals of Indian Railways. That is the busy routes. But on the branch lines, there will be other systems. So this is how it evolved. First, in fact, after 50 years of the first trial, 1925 and 1975, after 50 years of the first trial, the second trial was taken up between Howrah and Mughalsarai. And this trial was of advanced auxiliary warning and stop system on Eastern Railway. This again failed miserably because this was based on track magnets, which actually I think many of the people who are living in Mumbai area know about the track magnet. The same track magnet, when it was tried in Eastern Railway, failed miserably because this was the local conditions were difficult. The local conditions did not support this kind of a track magnet, which had a lot of copper inside it. So they were stolen or damaged, and therefore it failed. But the very same system, which is called the auxiliary warning system on Mumbai, Western and Central, succeeded, and it continues to work even till today. After the Gasel accident in the year 1999, I think, there was a big hue and cry, and then Konkan Railway came up with the concept of anti-collision device trials, which continued up to the year 2007-8, and thereafter that also, because there were a lot of spurious functionality-based problems, which were, in fact, if you, the people who are in this industry, you know that if there's a false positive means it's a wrong braking. Then in that case, the system becomes, the system cannot be depended upon, and therefore anti-collision device failed. But anti-collision device and later on the train protection warning system. Let me tell you, train protection warning system, what this word has come here for the first time. The train protection warning system, what we do in India is basically based on European train control system level 1. This is the system which has been installed in 3 sections in India. Delhi-Agra section, it's about 200 kilometers. Chennai-Gumidi-Pundi section, about 50 kilometers. And Kolkata Metro, 25 kilometers. These 3 were the working systems in the country. And these 3 systems were based on the concept of UNISIG, European ERTMS, ETCS. Now, when this was happening between 2007 and 13, in between what emerged was this ETCS was perceived to be very expensive because it was not made in India. It was most of the equipment was getting imported, and local engineering, in spite of best effort, was not really focused on through skill development. Therefore, in the year 2007 and I think 2008, Mr. Mansukani, who will be talking later, he, along with his senior Mr. Mahesh Mangal, they came in with the concept of train collision avoidance system, which they now call as indigenous train control system, which we'll talk about it later. So in the year 2008, those specifications emerged. And that in the very same year, they were able to finalize some kind of a pilot work to be done on South Central Railway, which in the year 2009, they were able to start the work. And that has how it emerged. Meanwhile, there was a concept paper in the railway board that modern train control system should be installed countrywide. And the strategy was that TCAS will be on branch lines, and ETCS level 2 for the purpose of high speed and line capacity. These functionalities that at that stage were not available with the TCAS. That was the strategy, and that was evolved. And last point is about the Delhi Metro, the distance to go, which came for the first time in 2002. This is completely a different kind of system altogether, but it is track circuit based. But there is a method of that gap, how to get the information about the gap. That gap has to be bridged. And now more recently, the communication-based train control system, where the gap is now radio-based. So this is how the systems have been evolving in India. I think this we have covered in the previous slide about Kunjuru and Vanchu committee, and these initiatives we have covered. This also I mentioned about Howrah Mughalsarai, because of theft, it was damaged. Now, the last portion of this, the bottom portion of the slide, you can see that AWS, when after it became successful in 1984-85, it started becoming obsolete in the year 2000 or so. because normally for 14, 15 years, most of the manufacturers support with engineering support and spare part support. And therefore, RDSO launched another initiative, which is called the Advanced Auxiliary Warning System, which is totally made in India and is now handling the entire activity on the system. Now I'll come to one by one to each of the systems which we have done, which were slightly more successful. Auxiliary warning system, which is used in Central and Western Railway suburban sections, is basically an overlay of the signaling. Overlay means it is an additional layer over the signaling system, which is the normal signal, track circuit points, level crossings, and everything. It is an overlay on the signals, and that it takes information from the signal and then passes on to the driver through some kind of a track magnet. That track magnet is sensed by the engine magnet when it passes over it, and it is able to get the condition of the signal ahead, condition or aspect of the signal ahead, that what is the condition of the signal ahead. And then if it is a signal which is red, they will be given, if it is red or yellow, he will be given some kind of a beep. And then in case he doesn't respond, then there will be automatic application of brakes. This is a brief block diagram of the system. This entire thing is from the signal through an optocoupler. Optocoupler means we cannot interfere with the basic interlocking and basic signaling. This has to be a totally a system which does not intrude or interfere with the main signal system. So it takes information from there, gives it to the track magnet in the form of a combination of frequencies, and then on the engine track magnet picks it up, and then on the onboard processor is programmed accordingly that if you get such and such frequency combination, then what has to be done, and for different combination, what action has to be taken and what indication has to be given. And in the case of the driver not acting, then what has to be done. The speed sensing is done. There is a speed sensor available, which is a tacho generator or tachometer, and then the braking control is also there. Some of the components I've already mentioned about track magnet, which is placed between the rails. You can see the photograph here. This track magnet is designed in a manner that it doesn't get damaged by a hanging part. You can see the shape of the track magnet. There's a big ramp in the direction of the, from which the movement can take place. So in case some hanging part is there, it gets deflected. This track magnet is connected to the signal, and it has got 3 chambers, which has got different kinds of coils, which are tuned to different frequencies. And the track magnet also accordingly tuned to different kind of a frequency. There are 2 types of track magnet. One is the dynamic, or which has got a varying information, and one is the fixed track magnet. They are called type A and type B. And the combination of frequencies which are used are 2800 hertz, 3600 hertz, 4400 hertz, 5200 hertz, 6000 hertz, and 6800 and 7600 hertz. These are the frequencies, and they are superimposed on a carrier of 100 kilohertz, and on that they are picked up by the onboard system. Optocoupler, as I mentioned, it has to pick up the signal from the. This is the optocoupler photograph. This picks up the signal from the conditional signal, whether it is yellow, double yellow, green, or red, and then accordingly it is conveys to them. Similarly, the onboard systems have got onboard cab display unit, which is for the purpose of braking, for the purpose of isolating it. In case you find that the frequent braking, then you can even isolate the system. And there's an indication panel which conveys to the driver what his response is supposed to be. So you can have a look at this, that this onboard logic has to be very carefully designed. And this particular design, I will suggest that if people are interested in that area, then they can always submit their requirements. We can work out specifically how the track magnet is fixed, how the onboard logic is programmed, and what is the role of each of the tuned circuit. F1, F2 means what, F2, F3 means what, and different frequency combination means what. That can be done. So I can only talk about the main component: onboard cab system, the engine magnet, which we have talked about. Tacho generator senses the speed. Isolating unit is necessary in case the AWS is frequently failing, so you have to isolate it. Brake actuating unit is purpose in case the driver is overspeeding or not stopping, then brake actuating unit gets actuated. And the CPU is the heart of the system, which gives buzzer, which gives alarms, which gives indications of different kinds. red, yellow, and blue indicators, which are defined meanings that can be seen in the rule book of the motorman. These are the components in more detail. You can see the photograph, controller cab equipment. This is the driving cab indication board, which you can see very clearly in front of you. Engine magnet, more closer view, track magnets, optocoupler. These are real photographs of the Bombay Suburban section. Now, what happened? These AWS, as I mentioned earlier, that started becoming obsolete. The parts were not available, and the OEM had stopped them. I think supporting this. They had mentioned that we'll continue for 2 more years or 3 more years, and that time was made use of by RDSO to develop those very components indigenously. And the main component basically was the track magnet, which was getting damaged and had to be replaced time and again, and the engine magnet. And it is a good thing that RDSO was able to develop sources in India, and they are now supporting this advanced auxiliary warning system. Now, what Central and Western Railway have now planned is to migrate from this system, which is the auxiliary warning system, to a communication-based train control system, on which reports are available now, and they are now, I think, for phase 1 of that project has been approved. And I think MRVC is working on that. Because there's no other method of controlling the headway in the case of Bombay Suburban section. Even with this automatic signaling and warning system, auxiliary warning system, we have been able to achieve a headway of 3 minutes during peak time. But if you want to go in for 120 seconds, then with many other things have to be seen. Or even if you want to go to 2.5 minutes, a lot of things have to be done. In fact, I started my career from Bombay Division in 1981. And we have done the re-signaling of the section to make from 3-aspect automatic signaling to 4-aspect automatic signaling, just to improve headway, relocating the signals, making shorter track sections so that the headway can be improved. And that activity in the year 1982-83 has helped us in handling traffic for some time. But now the time has come that a lot of inputs have to go into, because much more precise control of a train is required now. And that is possible through either distance to go or through communication-based train control, which are being deployed on metro systems. Then came the anti-collision device. And this device actually was a novel concept. This device was based on GPS. And this GPS was having 2 purposes. One was it was gave the location of the train. And second one was there was a patented logic defined by Konkan Railway, which is called the deviation count theory. The deviation count theory was able to change the train ID if the train moves from the main line into the loop line. Because the train IDs have been given to each of the lines, main line ID number 17, then 18, 19, and 20. So if the train is on 17 and it goes into loop line number 18, the train ID has to change, and this has to change automatically. So the onboard ACD device, the loco ACD device, was able to decode this through this logic, which I'm calling it the deviation count logic, which was able to detect it. Now the concept of ACD was quite, I think, straightforward. The concept was when 2 locomotives, in fact, this is a radio-based system. The location is now known, and you are coming into each other, and they are continuously transmitting their location and speed and direction. Now, if there's a train coming from the other direction, then you'll find that if the ID is the same, if the ID is different, there's no issue. The trains will pass. In the case of double line, they will pass through. But if the ID is the same, if both the ACDs which are approaching each other, both the locomotive ACDs which are approaching each other, have the same train ID, in that case, they will collide. And therefore, within a range of 3 kilometers zone, this particular thing actuates the onboard ACD unit, and which applies brake in case there is an approaching, without interfering with the driver's working, without disturbing him. It will just tell him that there is a collision kind of situation emerging, and please, and automatically the brakes will be applied. Now, this particular ACD system was having no interface with the signaling system. It had no interface with the signaling system, and it was also classified as a non-signaling system. But when we went in for a larger trials on Northeast Frontier Railway, we found that the number of spurious breakings, I'll call them, spurious breakings were so high that the user department said that we cannot afford to have so many breakings, because you have to time and again reset the train, and in the process each breaking was disturbing the line capacity and the operations drastically. And this is what I mentioned was the false positives which are there. These false positives cannot be accepted, and therefore in the year 2007-8, this is a typical sketch diagram, indicative diagram, which shows you can see that there are level crossing gate ACDs also. From that, for the level crossing ACDs unmanned as well as manned, they were able to, this approach warning was getting conveyed. And in the case of unmanned AC level crossing gate, in case you are able to provide a proper gate closing switch, then it was able to also convey back to the driver that the gate is still open. So wherever it is a manned interlock gate, there is no problem because the signal is linked to the the ACD will be able to perceive that the situation, that the manned level crossing gate, the LC gate ACD will transmit its condition. I'm open. And if it is open, the loco pilot will not be able to come and pass through the level crossing gate, because the level crossing ACD is transmitting that I am open. I have not allowed you to come. So that information goes to the locomotive ACD, and then accordingly it does it. But there is also a lot of because it's all is software based system, we were able to play with the system in a manner that since this was affecting traffic also, we thought of slowing down the train, especially in the case of level crossing. Instead of bringing it to a stop, we thought of slowing down, because that was able to give enough time to the gateman at manned gates and at the unmanned gates to vehicles to get off. And if you crawl to the gate, then the accident kind of situation was prevented to a large extent. Anyway, this is what is the inter-ACD radio communication, which is very communicated. The GPS data comes from the top, and the UHF data, they all work in the UHF band, and the location and direction and the speed were communicating to and the train ID was getting conveyed. And in case the collision type situation was emerging, there was a stoppage. Now I come to some certain, how did we move into the concept of ETCS and TCAS? Before that, we ever somebody was some initiative were taken that why don't we use the train protection warning system, which is the UK system, which is the UK TPWS. UK TPWS is a totally different kind of system, which is basically, and they had deployed the system in the entire UK because of their controlled environment, lower, shorter braking distances and shorter consists. But they had problems with freight trains there, so they had to, I think, have multiple devices in the field to control all that. So in the year 1999, there was a regulation in the UK rail, that is the Network Rail, or at that time British Rail, and they mentioned that this has to be done because they had a bad collision. Now what happens is the objective of this device is only to stop at red, nothing else. The only objective of this is to prevent SPAD. And this is what was achieved by deploying the train protection warning system on British Rail, where they used two devices. These are two, I can see two devices here. The OSS and the TSS. OSS means overspeed sensor. So there was the arming device and the triggering device, and there was the onboard antenna which was able to receive the signal. Arming to trigger, you can measure the time, and that measure the time indicates to you whether you're at what speed are you going. And the time from that place to the TSS, that is the stopping arming stopping device, they were able, it was to be ensured that the time is less than that. Normal time should have been like this, but the driver has come faster than that, then there will be an application of brake and the train will be brought to a stop. This is the trackside equipment, which is called lower speed sensor. It is located at a position determined by the line speed and gradient, and it's called the arming loop. That this is arming the onboard to actuate. And the next one is the trigger loop. That's called the train stop sensor, where it is about it triggers the stopping process in case the driver is coming faster than necessary. And that calculation was done by the onboard microcomputer. This is a typical layout. You can see the distances. These distances have to be very carefully done. Now, this is the problem in the Indian context. The moment you start putting these arming transmitters and triggering transmitters on the track, and these distances are very vital for measurement of timing, measurement of speed. In that case, this cannot be enforced in the Indian context because of many other reasons. Local conditions is one, but that apart, the operating conditions are like that you have got a train which is an EMU with a braking distance of 350 meters to a train which has got a braking distance of 1.8 kilometers. So you will have to have multiple OSS, overspeed sensor systems, and that would have made the system very complex, and therefore this was discarded and not agreed. Second thing was the more convincing parameter was this: there's only one company in the world which makes this, and this is what was not acceptable to the railway, and therefore this was discarded. The other system which we had investigated was the incremental train control system, which is again GPS based, but this is the fully signaled system on as an overlay. Plus, it is already working in many parts of the world today. This system was investigated in the year 2006 by the board, and I have also done footplating on this locomotive, and I could see the response of the driver. There's only one driver there. The response of the driver on the cab, the moment he entered the territory of incremental train control system, he was so relieved that now he knows that the train is under control of a system which is an additional help and assistance to him. And in case he overspeeds, or if in case he is not able to assess the proper braking mechanism and is not able to stop, that onboard system will take care. So this is the system which is totally again GPS based. Here actually what has had the system is that you have got servers at each station, and they can communicate on a UHF radio, and they again have a GPS location. Now GPS location, as you know, all of us know, the GPS has some error in this in the location determination. Therefore, they have devised a concept called DGPS. DGPS means differential GPS, which is based on the concept that there are certain fixed point on the network where where you take the signal from that and also take the signal on the train, and then whatever is the error at that time of the day, because there will be error in the GPS. What has happened?
Just a second, I think
What
it's the
happened?
control set. Yes.
Sir, you are audible, but screen is blank.
What happened to the screen?
Just a moment, sir.
Sir, please try to share the screen once again, sir. Probably it should work. Yes, sir, it's working.
Screen is not visible to me.
So it's a wide screen right now.
It's wide screen, sir.
So please try once more.
It's showing the message, not the screen.
Host may stop sharing by others. Block the sharing by others.
Okay.
सर आपकी स्क्रीन का मैसेज आ रहा है बट स्क्रीन ब्लैंक आ रही है. Sumit, are you able to see it?
Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think
Please help. Please help.
Arun sir is not. Arun sir is not there in the. Is logged out. Arun sir is logged out.
Arun sir, logged out?
Yes, now he's there. Just a moment. So now your co-host, sir, please try sharing the screen. Arun sir, kindly, I made you co-host now. You can try sharing the screen. I think your screen is there, but
It is showing blank.
is my
Yeah,
screen
now-
visible?
Yeah.
Okay, my screen is visible. And I think sir's screen should also be. If my screen is visible, then sir's screen should also be visible.
It's just coming blank.
So kindly move forward, move your PPT forward, sir. Probably maybe.
सुमित एक बार दोबारा से co-host कर दो डिलीट करके.
not there. Now he's there. Okay. सर आप मुझे होस्ट बनाइए एक बार. Make me a host. Ajay sir, make me the host.
मैं
You are the host now. Make me the host.
कैसे करें?
मोर पे जाके क्लिक करिए. रेलवे अकेडमी पे मोर.
करना है.
हाँ. चैट पे.
तुम्हारा नाम कर दें?
हाँ.
नहीं.
Or else you leave the meeting and then rejoin.